Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the next installment of Meet the Leaders. I am your host, Jerry McPherson, Director of Economic Empowerment for the Greater Phoenix Urban League. Before we get started, if you are new to the broadcast, we got a little bit of housekeeping. If you've been on the broadcast before, you know what I'm about to ask you. So please, before we get started, like, comment, and share. Let the world know that you're with us. We want to get as many people to this broadcast as possible for this very important conversation. Tonight, we will be discussing one of the most prominent issues that's been in the news over the past year, and that is voting rights and the fight for fair elections. Today, we will be joined by Representative Reginald Bolding, Minority House Leader from the 27th District within the Arizona House of Representatives. And later on in the broadcast, we'll be joined by Joy Chaney, Senior Vice President of Policy and Advocacy for the National Urban League, in addition to Executive Director of the Washington Bureau. Again, please like, comment, share, let the world know that you're with us. We're getting started in just a moment. If you are tuning in with us now, please drop in the comments. Let us know what part of the valley you are tuning in from. If you're watching from out of state, out of the area, out of the country even, please drop in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. If you have questions for our panelist members, you will have an opportunity to ask those questions. So feel free to just drop your question in the comments. As soon as it comes to mind, as soon as you're ready to get, as soon as it comes to mind, as soon as you're ready to get that question answered, we'll be happy to come around to the Q&A at the conclusion of the respective discussions. 56 years after the passage of the transformative Voter Rights Act of 1965 that provided federal oversight to address the racial discrimination in elections and voting practices, we now find those rights under attack, both locally and federally. In recent years, those attacks have only increased with tactics ranging from reducing the number of polling places and the hours in which they operate, to scrubbing the permanent early voting roll, all of which have effectively had the outcome of suppressing the vote. Tonight on Meet the Leaders, we'll meet with two key individuals fighting on the front lines to protect voter rights and fair elections. Reginald Bolding, Minority House Leader from the 27th District in the Arizona House of Representatives, and Joy Chaney, Executive Director of the Washington Bureau and Senior Vice President of Policy and Advocacy for the National Urban League, will join us to discuss what's being done to protect your rights and ensure fair elections and what you can do to take action. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce the President and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Urban League, George Dean. Take it away, George.
Good evening. I'm George Dean, the President and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Urban League, and I also welcome you to the November presentation of Meet the Leaders, Voting Rights and the Fight for Fair Elections. As Jerry said, 65 years after the passage of the Voting Rights Act, which provided federal oversight to address racial discrimination in elections and voting practices, are now under attack. Voter suppression laws have been introduced in over 40 states, and in many places there has been a scarcity of polling places. On November 3rd, just a couple of weeks ago, Republicans blocked the latest effort to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. That bill aims to quash voter suppression and the repressive laws enacted in some states, especially in Georgia and Texas, where they already been enacted. A recent released report pointed out that poor and low-income people accounted for more than a third of all voters overall in the 2020 presidential election. That, more than anything else, let us know that we need the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the restoring of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Now, we have a panel tonight with Representative Reginald Bolding and Ms. Joy Chaney, the Senior Vice President of the National Urban League and Executive Director of the Washington Bureau, to talk with us about voting and fair election, the fight for fair elections and voting and so forth. And we all know that that is of a very serious concern One of the things that report that I spoke about earlier also pointed at is the fact that low income people and low income people, not only from the communities of color, but low income white people as well, turned out for the 2020 election. In fact, the 2020 election was the most voter turnout in the history of voting in the United States in a presidential election and so forth. We need to keep that going because the opposition has come up with all kinds of reasons. As I said, over 40 states have come up with voter suppression laws and regulations and so forth that's going to keep us from voting. So this is a very important discussion. And with the midterms of 2022, just about a year away from now, a little less than a year away from now, it's going to be important that we have voting rights and fair elections in everything that we do. I know that it's been talked about, and we still got people talking about stop the steal and the big lie and the vote was stolen and all of these kind of things. So our intent with this Meet the Leaders Forum is to get you informed so that you'll know what it's all about and not believe everything that you hear and see about elections not being fair and elections being stolen and so forth and so on. So with that, I'll turn it back to Jerry and let him introduce you to our guests, and we'll get this conversation started. Back to you, Jerry.
George, once again, thank you for your leadership to the Greater Phoenix community and leading the Greater Phoenix Urban League for going on 30 years and your 50th year of serving the movement. As mentioned, today's first guest will be Representative Reginald Bolding, representing the 27th District, Arizona House of Representatives. Reggie, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So those of us in the Greater Phoenix community, we know you well. You've been a stalwart in the Greater Phoenix community, leading and being a champion for underserved communities for I take it maybe close to 10 years at this point. But for those watching who are not familiar, please take a moment to introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jerry. And I just want to first say thank you to the Greater Phoenix Urban League for just putting on, a forum to allow individuals to really tackle and talk about top issues that matter in our community. For those of you who haven't had an opportunity to meet, my name is Reginald Bolding. I serve as the Arizona House Democratic Leader here in the Arizona House of Representatives. This is my 7th year serving in the state legislature. The last 3 years, I've had the pleasure of serving in Democratic leadership, 2 as our House Minority Whip, which is the 3rd ranking Democrat in the House. And now, with my colleagues' support, I serve as the House Democratic Leader. So really on the front lines, negotiating deals with our governor and also the Speaker of the House and the Senate President. In addition to serving in the state legislature, I'm also a candidate for Arizona Secretary of State, the top elections office here in our state. It is so important, especially when you think about the topics that we're going to talk about today. And also I run a civic engagement organization called the Arizona Coalition for Change. So thanks for having me. I'm excited to jump into the discussion.
Thank you, Reggie. As outlined, you're a very busy man in the state and working on a lot. And as mentioned, I've been on the front line for quite a bit of time. I'm going to bring in President George Chaney into discussion. We'll have a bit of a roundtable. I'm sure he has plenty of questions for you as well. So, George, welcome back to the broadcast, and I'll let you kick it off.
Okay. All right. You want me to ask Reginald a question? Yep. All right, Reginald. Very good. Good to see you. And thanks for agreeing to be a part of this very important discussion and so forth. What are you seeing as far as Arizona is concerned? I know that there have been some laws introduced and so forth that's trying to deal with. What do you think is the reason for all of this, Reginald?
Well, we here in Arizona, I'll start in Arizona, then I'll kind of get broader throughout the nation. But I mean, this past legislative session, we've seen some of the most aggressive attacks on voting rights over the last decade here. And it's all related to what I call a power grab. So if you think about Arizona in 2010, Republicans controlled every single statewide office. There were super majorities in both the House and the Senate. And, out of the 4 top offices, the United States Senate offices and also the governor and the Republican, they were all, and the governor and the Secretary of State, they were all controlled by Republicans. At that point in time, 60% of people in Arizona voted by mail. Now, that was in 2010. If you move to 10 years later, so in 2020, 80% of people vote by mail. There are more people voting now than they ever have before. So since you have more people voting, you've seen the entire dynamic of elected leadership change. If you look at the top 4 offices here in the state of Arizona are 2 U.S. Senate offices, the governor's office, and also the Secretary of State. 3 out of those top 4 offices are now controlled by Democrats. The state legislature, there's a 1 vote difference in the House and a 1 vote difference in the Senate. You have a corporation commission that at one point in time had 5 Republicans. Now you have 2 Democrats. You have the superintendent of public instruction, who's a Democrat. So you've seen the entire change in the legislature. You've seen the entire change in state government offices and federal offices. And that's because more people have decided to vote. So the way that you change the dynamics of that is to make it more difficult for people to vote. So this past legislative cycle, we've seen a direct attack in votes by mail. As I mentioned, we moved from 60% of people voting by mail in 2010 to 80% of people voting by mail in 2020. And, this past legislative session, we've seen bills that would make it more difficult for people to put their ballots in the mail. One bill that was introduced would have created what I call a poll tax. It would have required all citizens to take your photo ID, put it on a photocopier, and take that copy of your ID into your mail-in ballot and then mail it for your vote to actually count. So for people who don't have access to, photo IDs, it would have made it difficult for them. We also saw a bill that would have made every single mail-in ballot notarized. So people would have had to have their ballots notarized and then send them in for them to count. We also saw one of the biggest bills that actually those 2, and it's important to note that we were able to defeat those two bills. But this next bill that I'm going to mention actually passed. And that was Senate Bill 1485. And it is actually probably was the largest attack on voting rights the state has ever seen. It would essentially remove or purge nearly 200,000 people from our vote by mail system. So if you haven't voted in the last 2 election cycles, you will be removed from our mail-in voting cycle to make it more difficult for you to vote.
Just, wow. People don't want you to vote. And we've been told all the time that we must vote and so forth. In fact, I know in some parts of this country, people have lost their lives just for having the ability to vote. And that is still going on even today as we sit here now and think about this. What about that whole issue of harvesting voters and so forth? So that took away groups like the Urban League, where we would have our constituents to come in and bring their ballots, and we would get them down to the recorder's office and so forth. That's also not working anymore, is it?
Yeah, so there's actually a Supreme Court case that went a law that started in Arizona that went all the way to the Supreme Court that covers something that people have termed ballot harvesting, or what we just say is helping people turn their ballots in who may have a difficult time making it to the polls. So essentially, there had been a practice, if you have someone who's elderly who may not be able to make it down to the polls, or you have a neighbor who may not be able to make it to the polls, they could give you their mail-in ballot. And when you're going down there, they can drop those off. Or you may have had things like churches who have, souls to the polls that, they may encourage their congregation to bring their ballots to the mail to the church, so they can then take them down to ensure that, there's that their ballots are in and they count if they couldn't make it on a particular day. That was deemed, but the Supreme Court said that's unconstitutional, and we no longer can do that. One other thing that's problematic is that if people vote outside of their precinct, the Supreme Court also ruled that their votes would not count, and we know that's extremely problematic. So if you don't go to a voting center, and you actually, cast your ballot in a precinct that's out of your precinct, your vote would not count. And that's extremely problematic because we know that you could, be someone who has been legally registered to vote. You could have always voted, and your polling location could have changed. The lines for precincts change. And you go to a out of precinct place to cast your ballot, your vote will not count. So that's why we encourage people to have mail-in ballots. That way they can actually fill those out and drop them off at any polling location. But we know the rules have been really rigged to make it more difficult for people's votes to count.
One other question, Reginald, and we've heard a lot of conversations and discussions and so forth about the audit that Senate Majority Leader Fan came up with, she and her cohorts at the Arizona Senate. Have you, and from a representative standpoint, or from being an elected representative, have you all been given any information about that audit other than what the public has received?
We've been kept out of the process as far as the information regarding the audit. The info that we have is the same thing that the public has. We know that this wasn't an audit that is a federally recognized company that conducts elections audits. We know that that's not what this firm was. The Cyber Ninjas, who was the company chosen to conduct this audit. And we also know that this audit was done for 3 reasons. One was to fire up the Trump base, to keep them still motivated and agitated now that former President Trump is no longer in office. The second piece was to fundraise. They fundraised, nearly $9 million off of this audit. So they needed to make sure that they could fundraise. And the third reason why they had this audit was to then use it as a reason to actually introduce bills for the 2022 legislative session. So I'm expecting next year at the Capitol that I'll be fighting a number of different bills that are going to come from the audit. We've even heard many members say that, we've done the audit in Maricopa County. Now let's go down to Pima County. Then they're going to go to Pinal, and they're going to try to keep this up to do those 3 things: galvanize the Trump base, fundraise, and introduce bills to make it more difficult for people to vote.
Wow.
Representative Bolding, we've seen that in recent years, there's been a number of measures taken from reducing the number of polling places to reducing the hours in which they operate, which pretty much encourage the mail-in voting ballot. Of those steps that have taken, how much of that is simply the decision of whoever is responsible for the polling, i.e. the Secretary of State, versus some other laws that need to be enacted in order to make those changes?
This is actually extremely important. And I think, for everyone watching, as we think about how can we attack power, we have to know where we have to actually go to fight power. So when we talk about widespread election laws that are changing, the state legislature is going to actually be the place to make that fight. So when we talk about, a law that will remove folks from the rolls, that would make it difficult, where, as you saw in Georgia, where they made it a crime to give people a bottle of water while they're standing in line, that's the state legislature. Those laws are being made. So if we want to fight against laws that are going to make it more difficult for people to vote, that's going to actually make it more difficult for your ballot to count, we want to have that fight at the state legislature. If we want to attack, procedures with regards to elections, how elections are ran, making sure that we have, things like, more voting centers or making sure that we're staffed up at our polling locations, that we have people who are trained well at our polling locations. That's going to be our county recorders. So our county recorders are the people who actually run elections. And then our Secretary of State, the Secretary of State serves as the chief elections officer. So when you have, many times when you have, laws that are challenged, or you have court cases, our Secretary of State, they're named in those lawsuits to really make sure that they are fighting for the people. They should be fighting for the people with elections related issues. They're controlling campaign finance. Our Secretary of State is also, making sure that they should be making sure and fighting to make sure that our county recorders are actually, doing the job that they were elected to do, and also certifying election equipment, amongst several other things that the Secretary of State's office does. So we have to make sure that we're identifying where these issues are and fighting power at all three levels: the state legislature, our county recorders, and also with our Secretary of State's office.
Reginald, you said earlier that you were also a candidate for the office of Secretary of State in the next election coming up in 2022, I guess it is. What are your plans to change that office from the way it is operating at this point in time and so forth?
One of the things that is so important is that as elected leaders, you have the ability to use, your voice and also your vote, right? But for the Secretary of State's office, using your voice is extremely important. So right now, previously, in my role as the executive director of the Arizona Coalition for Change, we have been on the front lines of, bringing lawsuits that attack voting suppression. Many people may not remember this, but in 2020, we said that this is the most important election of our lifetime. We also were faced with a global pandemic. And what we saw was that the voter registration turnout was much lower than it should have been, because people were staying at home. They were effectively, quarantining, or they were, staying at their homes, and they weren't out, and they didn't get an opportunity to register to vote. So we sued the state of Arizona to extend the voter registration deadline, and we spent, we won that case, and we got 10 additional days for people to register to vote. And within those 10 days, 35,000 people registered to vote. And when you think about the state of Arizona, Joe Biden actually won Arizona by less than 11,000 votes. So we know that extending the voter registration deadline played a role in people having their voices heard. So for me, what I'll be doing is I'll be making sure that anytime the state legislature is attacking people's rights to vote, we're going to actually take it to the courts, because we know that in the courts that we can prove, when we see egregious episodes of voter suppression, we're going to fight them. I currently just filed a lawsuit attacking Senate Bill 1485 that removed people from the permanent early voting list. So we'll be more aggressive on that aspect. Also, we have something called National Voter Registration Day. This is where we should be registering every single high school 17-and-a-half-year-old to register to vote. There's no reason why our young students aren't already registered once they leave high school. So I'll be having an aggressive campaign to make sure that we're registering those folks to vote. And then it's also extremely important that people know that the Secretary of State's office handles things like our many small business filings, trademarks, things of that nature. So we'll run an office that's transparent, that makes it so those individuals who are looking to get trademarks and our filing system, that they can actually go through that without cutting through some of the red tape. But most importantly, making it easier for people to vote. Access to voting and fair rights is going to be the top of the thing that I'll be fighting for.
And we've also heard that in some instances, the legislature is trying to take away some of the duties and responsibilities of the Secretary of State and move that to the Attorney General or to the legislature or something. What's the situation with that?
So you're hitting all the right points. Absolutely. So this past legislative session, we had the state budget, and during the state budget, it was so important that people got an opportunity to see, how budgets are made, because what you saw was, mismanagement at its finest. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the state legislature, there's only a 1 vote margin in the House and a 1 vote margin in the Senate, which means that if you are in the majority party, or if you're a Republican, you have to get every single one of your members to agree with you in order for you to pass anything. So what we saw was a lot of individual members of the Republican Party say, in order for me to vote for the state budget, I want you to enact these laws. I want you to enact this policy and put it in the state budget. So many people may be familiar with what now is being termed CRT or critical race theory or issues that are, which I think a lot of people misconflate what critical race theory is, but there was a policy that was put in the state budget that said if any if any teacher is teaching about, race, then that teacher could be fined. That was put into the state budget. There was also something put in the state budget that the lawmakers said that we want to remove the Secretary of State's powers, and we're going to actually we're going to give the Secretary of State their powers back after Secretary Hobbs is no longer in office. So they tried to remove the powers and then restore the powers at the end of 2022. They also put in other policies that we know that just were unconstitutional. This was, we sued the state legislature for the practice of what they did, and the courts ruled with us. So the Secretary of State does have their power. The policy that was, fining teachers, that has also been removed. There also was a policy that was just really egregious. One lawmaker said, in order for me to, the lights went out in here, I got to move for a second. One lawmaker said that the only way that they'd vote for the budget is if they put in the budget that says the only people that can serve on civilian review boards are former police officers. That was also put into the state budget. So the only people that can serve on civilian review boards are police officers. That was also taken out of the budget too, because it was just unconstitutional.
Wow.
Representative Bolding, great work. Again, as obviously been fighting on the front line for quite a bit of time. You mentioned earlier that 2 bills were shot down, but the third one had passed. Looking forward, what can community members do? How can they get involved to make sure that these sort of laws don't continue, and or what can be done in order to kind of undo some of those laws that have recently passed?
Well, one of the things that we know is that power has never conceded without a challenge. And one thing that we also should know is that when you've had people in charge of this state for decades, in charge of a $13-14 billion budget, they've had control over that annual budget for decades. They're not going to get rid of that power. They're not going to get rid of that power easily. They're not going to just let the demographic changes in Arizona decide their destiny. So if they cannot change the rules, they're going to change the people who are playing in the game. So what we have to make sure that we are doing, especially in 2022, our eyes has to be focused on the state legislature, because we know that is going to be the only way that they're going to be able to actually change the rules of the game, is to actually change the laws why they currently still have power. So expect that in 2022, that you're watching the elections committee, the government committee, and you are using your voice to not only testify, but to advocate for laws that are going to be fair and treat people fair. So that's one of the things that I think is important. We also have to look at our redistricting process. So we didn't get a lot into it, but redistricting is so important here. Here in Arizona, we have something called the IRC, or the Independent Redistricting Committee. But I'm going to tell you this, that the redistricting committee is not, it's been designed to really set up for whoever controls the governor's office, because the governor, they get to actually decide the first list of who people can actually appoint to sit on that IRC. So these are going to be congressional lines, and state lines are going to be drawn. And these lines will be in effect for the next 10 years, so the next decade. So the people who are drawing these lines, they will be like this for the next decade. So effectively, if you can control the lines, you can control who's in the legislature. If you control who's in the legislature, you control what bills and laws that are going to be here for the next 10 years. So we have to make sure we're paying attention. So definitely click on the link, go testify, get involved in the IRC, because we absolutely need to make sure that people are focused there. And then the third piece is our 2022 elections. We have an opportunity here in Arizona when every single statewide office is going to be up, and every single state legislative seat is going to be up, and every single state legislator is going to be running in a new district because the IRC. So it's important for us to get involved and get engaged. And it's important for us to realize that we're going to have a new governor no matter what. You're going to have a new Secretary of State no matter what. You're going to have a new state treasurer no matter what. So it's going to be important for us to get involved and decide the destiny of where we want the state to go. And people have to make sure that they're stepping up for it.
Thank you so much, Reggie.
Thank you.
And it really points out the need that we've been pushing on. We've been pushing during 2020. In addition to voting, was the census. So those tallies that were taken, those counts that were made, this is the redistricting is the direct result of those numbers and those tallies that will happen every 10 years. And, there may have been opportunities missed, but it's important that we stay engaged, because that redistricting, the drawing of those lines are happening as we speak. We actually spoke about that at last month's Meet the Leaders, that process and how community members can get involved. I know we only have you for a couple more minutes, but I did want to give you an opportunity to talk about your Sleeves Up campaign. Would you like to share any information about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Arizona Coalition for Change launched a new campaign called Sleeves Up AZ. And you can simply visit sleevesupaz.com. And the campaign is targeted to ensure that, the African American community is vaccinated. Right now here in the state of Arizona, less than 3% of all African Americans are actually vaccinated. And while we make up nearly 5% of the population, we have the lowest vaccination numbers out of every single demographic here in the state of Arizona. So there's a significant underrepresentation of us who are vaccinated. And the Sleeves Up campaign is designed to educate, so allow people to understand, what the vaccine is and how the vaccine, came about. I know a lot of folks are saying, hey, this came online way too soon. And we want to make sure that we actually give people the information so they understand, why, that process actually happened very quick. Also, we want to make sure that we let people know about access, where you can actually get vaccinated. Because we know there's still some people who, if you don't have a healthcare physician, and you don't typically go to the office and go to the doctor's office, I think it's unreasonable to expect that people know where they should actually go get vaccinated. A lot of people don't know. So we want to make sure that we're giving people information of where they can get vaccinated. And then thirdly, we want to just understand. Some people, it's everyone has a choice. And for those individuals who aren't vaccinated, we want to have a face-to-face conversation and understand why. Because we know that at the end of the day, that for many African Americans, we're the first one fired and the last one hired, and we saw that during this pandemic. And we don't want to get to a place here in this country where your vaccination status determines your employment status, and we also don't want to see more folks who look like us in the ICU, and the ICU ends up to them ultimately losing their life. We have so much to live for, and if we can prevent that by just rolling up our sleeves, and we want to go make sure that we allow people to have that information.
Good, very good.
Yeah, Reggie, definitely want to extend the invitation and hopefully we can collaborate. Both the Greater Phoenix Urban League as well as the National Urban League has been a part of the All In campaign, again, similar to the work that you're doing with Sleeves Up Arizona, to get the information out to our community members and make the vaccine widely available, and encourage our community members to take part and dispel any information or misinformation that may be out there. So I will be following up with you and seeing how we can collaborate and combine forces to get our community members vaccinated.
Looking forward to it.
Okay.
So, I know you're short on time. Just want to give you an opportunity for some closing thoughts before we let you go.
Yeah, I just want to say again, organizations like the Greater Phoenix Urban League are really providing an opportunity for people in our community to get involved. One of the things that we often hear is people ask, how can I get involved? How can I get engaged? And I think, you can, look no further than, the Greater Phoenix Urban League, who's looking to get people involved and engaged. We know the young professionals have been doing an amazing job out in our community to really, build and bridge that pipeline, because we know that, no matter what happens, we can't do this work alone. This work shouldn't be done alone. And we know that collectively we are stronger together. And I'm excited to say that, the work that the Urban League is doing will continue to ensure that we have our voting rights and we continue to fight for fair elections down in the future. So thank you so much for having me.
Okay. And Reginald, together we make a difference.
Absolutely.
All right.
That was Representative Reginald Bolding, represented the 27th District for the Arizona House of Representatives. Very informative, very powerful discussion. George, what did you think about the conversation?
Okay. Oh, I thought it was fantastic, really. And It's going to be interesting as we see. Hopefully, all of our listeners out there will take heed to what have gone on up to this point and get involved in this whole process of voting rights and fair elections and so forth.
So next, we'll continue the conversation and look at a more broader, more wider perspective. As mentioned, we have Representative Bolding, who is a state representative, but we also wanted to have the conversation from a federal perspective on what is being done to protect voter rights, as well as ensure fair elections. So with that being said, I would like to introduce Joy Chaney, Senior Vice President of Policy and Advocacy for the National Urban League, in addition to being the Executive Director of the Washington Bureau. Joy, welcome to the broadcast.
You're on mute, Joy.
Yeah, she got it.
Thank you so much for having me. Jerry, President Dean, it's good to be on with you. Greetings from Washington, D.C., where it finally is Infrastructure Week. We are so thrilled to be here. I don't know, are we going to do you want to do questionnaire, or do you want me to just get in there and talk generally about what's happening at the federal level?
So we will get to some questions, but first, if we can start out with kind of introducing yourself. We know who you are. We are very familiar with your work, but for those in the audience, please give them a moment.
Yes.
About yourself.
Absolutely. So I do have the privilege of working for Mark Morial on his executive cabinet. I am the Senior Vice President for Policy and Advocacy at the Urban League, and my other title is Executive Director of the Washington Bureau. That is not to be confused with the Greater Washington Urban League. The Washington Bureau is the voice for the National Urban League in Washington, D.C., before Congress, before the administration, and so on. So if Mark can't be there, then I try to be there. And so it's my privilege really to have that job. And one of the things I get to do is I get to go out and talk to other affiliates. Easier now than perhaps when we're traveling. We get to do it virtually. But, really we're representing you and what you need. We want to make sure that we're helping you all connect with your federal officials. Some people have great relationships, like some people don't. We try to bridge the gap there. And then, we also want to be your voice on a range of public policy issues, from economic policy to criminal justice policy to democracy and voting policy. And I know that's what we're talking about here today. To health and education. So we have a large portfolio really across everything that we put in our sort of Urban League economic and civil rights empowerment agenda.
Yeah, indeed. And it's obvious, being here at the Washington Bureau, but very necessary to be on the doorstep of our legislators, those lawmakers, that you can be in front of them and in person and truly advocating for some of the needs of the underserved communities. I'll yield the floor to President Dean, give him an opportunity to ask a couple of questions. But before we do that, George, if you are in the audience and you have the questions for Joy, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll be happy to ask your questions later in the broadcast. But we'll start with President Dean.
Joy, I mentioned earlier about the fact that the John Lewis Voting Advancement Act was blocked by Republicans on November 3rd. Is there any chance that it's going to come back up again? Where are we with that situation?
Yeah, that's right. So the John Lewis Voting Rights Act was blocked by Republicans, meaning we could not get over the filibuster to get on to debate. We need a 60 vote threshold. And we were able to get all Democrats, but no Republicans, or not enough. And that has also happened. There are two voting rights bills. I want to be clear about that. It's the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and that's a very important bill there. But there's also the For the People Act, or the Freedom to Vote Act, is the new name that you will hear most often. And that bill is is also one that the Republicans have rejected and made impossible for us to get on the bill and move forward to even debate or amendment or any of the things that one does in the legislative process. So both bills have been blocked. We do expect that Senator Schumer, Majority Leader Schumer, will bring them back up to the floor. The strategy there is just to continue to bring them on the floor and to show up the members who say that they are for voting rights. Voting rights used to be a bipartisan issue, and yet they have not voted to even get on the bill. So that we could replace it with the freedom of vote language or anything. So that will continue to happen. But we have really shifted to moving away from just doing show votes. It's clear where we are nonpartisan. We are not at all taking sides between Democrats and Republicans. We're just talking about who's supporting the bill.
Right.
And it is clear that the minority party has no interest in supporting this bill or casting a vote for it. And so we have to move forward with other strategies. And we know that the filibuster has been used to block voting rights in the past, and it has been used again to do it. And we've moved on to really needing to amend the filibuster for the purposes of getting forth a voting rights bill on issues that are critical, like democracy. We already... Oh, go ahead. I'll pause.
No, yeah, Joy, just for
different topics, y'all. I could go on and on.
No worries. Just to educate our audience,
Yes.
If you can just explain a little bit about what the filibuster is.
Yes, it is an arcane Senate rule. Many of you have seen Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I'm sure there would be lots of hands raised, right?
Yeah, they're out there virtually.
Yes. So we've seen that, and we see him go down there, and we've romanticized the filibuster as a way to block the Senate, slow it down from moving forward. And you get up there and you speak all night, and it's a standing filibuster. We call it right. That's what it's done. But the truth is that's not the way it works anymore. You can go on down to cloakroom. You say, "Hey, I'm on a raise an objection," and then go on off to the golf course. You don't have to stand there. There's no standing or speaking filibuster. Just to be kind to those who cannot stand, we don't say standing anymore, but no speaking filibuster. There's no requirement for that. And as a consequence, people do it all the time. You can't even get anything done without a 60 vote threshold, with the exception of budget bills. So you're seeing right now, and that can happen twice in a Congress. You're seeing right now, earlier in the year, we had a reconciliation bill. And it was, things that are impact to the budget. We're doing it again with the second part of the Build Back Better Act, human infrastructure. It impacts the budget. And so it can actually pass by a simple majority.
Got it.
There is no such exception, though, for voting rights. And we think that makes no sense. So the most fundamental thing we get at the budget, there are other things that are exempted from a 60 vote threshold for a senator being able to object ad infinitum. We believe that democracy should be one of those things.
Absolutely.
Joy, you've been back there in Washington with all of these politicians and so forth. Do you sense, or do you get the feel that there's any urgency among anybody back there about the importance of getting these voting rights bills passed?
I do, actually. Within the people who are already planning to vote for the bill, there is urgency. Where we do not see the urgency that we think we need to see is around the filibuster.
Yeah.
There are people who are want, obviously, to have a voting rights bill, but they're not quite sure they want to get rid of the filibuster, because the filibuster has been romanticized for all the reasons we just talked about, even though it doesn't work the way it's supposed to work. But it also, folks think, well, I used it once or I used it before. But the truth is, the way that it used to work. So I'm a Senate alum, right? I've worked in the Senate twice in my life. And the way it used to work was very different. People would put the filibuster out there, but it would be used as a way to bring people to the table to negotiate, and with the goal of getting beyond it, right? And getting votes, getting the 60 votes that are needed, or making some deal to have 50 votes once you do a certain number of amendments. Unfortunately, the Republicans just simply aren't making those deals anymore. They're saying, even people who we know support the bills are just flat out saying they're not going to vote for it. So without any indication that they're ever going to come to the table and make any kinds of deals, or when you make deals with them, trust me, both of these bills have been amended to try to accommodate and attract Republican members. And I hope we'll go into what the bills do in a second. But both of them have been amended to do that, and yet they still won't vote. So now we have an issue where the filibuster is no longer being used to bring people together, right? To say, hey, you need to go and negotiate with the other side of the aisle. It's now being used as a roadblock, not just to delay, but to completely stand in the way of any progress. And so this is why so many of the things that you think should be done in the Senate are not able to get done, because simply one party is like, I just simply will not come to the table on any of it. And that makes it hard to do business. And so it has to change. Otherwise, we're dedicating ourselves to being completely ineffective and having no wins, not just on voting rights, but on a range of issues. But just to be clear, we're not saying you got to get rid of the whole filibuster. What we're saying is on issues as fundamental as voting rights, where there is the threat of people playing politics with people's fundamental right to vote, with people trying to, as the previous guest, the state representative said, saying, hey, if we can't win them over, we'll just keep them from voting.
Yeah.
When that is the propensity, when that is the threat on the table, then you do have to be careful about 60 vote thresholds. No corporation in America works that way. No one would allow that. Your board doesn't work that way. No one works that way, because it wouldn't be sufficient. It wouldn't work. So we gotta address it. We have to amend it, and that is why we had a scorecard. So I'll pause, but definitely ask me about our civil rights scorecard.
All right. But it's also a fight against anti-democracy.
Yes.
It seems that's why I was asking that question about the urgency.
It's urgent.
It's not business as usual.
It's not business as usual. And that is what we've said. So to be clear, last week we released, for the first time ever, a civil rights voting scorecard. Okay. And we chose voting rights as the issue. We judged them on two things predominantly: their support of voting rights legislation, including the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. So support meaning they voted for it, they co-sponsored it, whatever, as well as the For the People Act / the Freedom to Vote Act. We voted, so that was 50% of their score. But the other 50%, to the Mr. President's, his point, the urgency required us to judge 50% of their score based on where they were on the filibuster.
Okay.
That's how important it is. And so we gave you the most points if you were saying, hey, we absolutely have to change the filibuster. We gave you 2 points if it was possible, 3, 2 points if you were willing, if you were open to some kind of change. And then if you weren't quite sure and were on the fence, we only gave you 1 point. Because here's the truth: we got to root people out. It's not okay to be polite about it and say, oh, well, I maybe I'll support the filibuster one day, someday, could be. Not when the stakes are as urgent as they are right now. We just heard from your other speaker about what's happening about redistricting. That's happening all over the country. 49 out of 50 states have anti-democratic bills that are focused on restricting the right to vote that have been introduced. Okay, about 19 of those states have actually passed laws, right? And then at the same time, there are redistricting efforts that are happening right now, that are not fair and that are seeking to eliminate members of color and to diminish the power of the Black and the brown vote. So we have to address it. It's a clear and present danger and threat to democracy. And that is why we scored it. We weighted the score on the filibuster so heavily, and why some senators, including from your great state, one in particular did not got a incomplete score because we're not quite sure where she is in that. She supports voting rights legislation, let's be clear, which is great. But if you support legislation, but you don't support a pathway towards passing it, what is that?
Right. And just for those in the audience, those following us on Facebook or YouTube, the link is available to view that civil rights scorecard that Joy referenced. NAACP.org/resources/civil rights scorecard report. Feel free to click the link in the comment section. George?
You want to talk about a little bit about what each bill does?
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's go, because I think it's important to understand, because you're going to keep hearing about these two bills. And I want you to know that they're both important. They might be combined at some point, but they each do different things. So the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act is sort of what everyone knows about, right? Because it has the best name ever. Right. That bill is focused on restoring the luster and the power of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So it is correcting the decisions the Supreme Court made that undermined the strength of that bill. So bringing back pre-clearance, making sure that states that have discriminated in the past are able, that we're able to review any of their voting rights changes. Addressing other things that have undermined and weakened the right to vote, and protections against voting discrimination. The For the People Act, or what has become the Freedom to Vote Act, which is a bipartisan bill that is supported by Senator Manchin, that is a little watered down, but is good enough. That bill is so important because it addresses the attacks that are going on across the nation to try to make it more difficult to vote. So each bill does something different. One is kind of looking at future voting rights actions, right? Making sure that we're protecting the right to vote in that way. And the second one is dealing with how do we counteract, how do we create a new high floor for voting? How do we make it easier for people to vote? How do we ensure same-day registration? How do we ensure that people can vote on more days? How do we make sure that if you have a voter ID, you can use multiple forms of ID? So that you're not limited in how you can prove who you say you are. Really raising the floor for what voting rights should look like across the country. And so it's really critical that we have not one, but two of those bills. And so I'm going to also give you a fact sheet that you can share with all of the attendees tonight. I thought it would be up on our website, but it hasn't quite made it up there yet. So I'll just send it to you so that you can send it out in your follow-up material that goes into more details about what each bill does. But I think it's really important that you understand that we're going to have to have both bills. We're going to have bills that address the things that are happening in Texas, things that they're attempting in Arizona, things that are happening in Florida and everywhere. We got to address that, but we also have to make sure that last minute changes to polling locations, places where they've had traditional amounts of discrimination, that we are monitoring those places and that we have restored the Voting Rights Act's provisions that allow us to do that, and places where they have disproportionately large numbers of minority populations that may be targeted. We have to make sure that both things are done.
So to be clear, the first bill that you mentioned, named after John Lewis, that would effectively restore the Voting Rights
Act of 1965.
And the latter bill would kind of go, maybe I don't want to call it a step further, but it will address some of the tactics that are rolling out in other.
Yes,
it will combat
some of these modern trickster tactics
right.
that are coming out, it would invalidate some of those. Because the truth is, we're not able to stop all of these bills that are happening at the state level. Try though, everyone at the urban leagues across the country are trying to do. Everyone is engaged, but it's a numbers game. We know we have the ability to do it. It's a thing where the federal government has got to step in, not to mandate, election practices across the nation, but really to say there are certain things that if you do them, they stand in the way of people being able to vote. They make it harder to vote, and we can't allow that. The federal government sets floors, right? You can always go above, but you can't go below, because it's a violation of the Constitution. It's a violation of fundamental rights that should be guaranteed to every citizen, no matter where you live. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to raise the floor on voting and set a new national standard. And just so you all know the politics of that, Freedom to Vote Act is supported by Senator Joe Manchin, because we know that we got to get to the 51 votes, right? So it is supported by him. It is supported by Senator Sinema. And the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is supported by Senator Sinema. It is not yet supported by Senator Joe Manchin. But he has indicated that he supports it substantively, but he would like Lisa Murkowski to get on it. Our point is that, and actually we've learned that there is a bill, a version of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that they believe that Murkowski is going to get on. So that's great. But so at this point, it's not about getting one Republican or getting unless we get 10. We have to have some change to the filibuster. So you're going to hear us, and hopefully all of you out there will be not just asking, where does your member of Congress stand on Voting Rights Act or John Lewis or freedom to vote? That's great. That's a great answer. Many of them will say yes, they support it, whether they're on it or not. You might even have Republicans who say they support it. But the question is, will they vote for it? And then if they vote for it, will they allow us to move forward without a supermajority? Right. And if the answer is no to that latter one, then it really doesn't matter if they support the Voting Rights Act.
Right. And you made a very important point, and I just would like to reiterate that we are the Greater Phoenix Urban League. We serve the state of Arizona, but we have viewers out there across the country. We know those that are watching have friends and family across the country. So, this might be your mission to reach out to those friends and family members around the state and ask them where their elected official stands on that, because they may have a duty to pick up that phone call and express to their elected official where they would like them to stand on these respective bills. It's voting rights, right? That's right.
And we have an activation for you. Right. To be able, we'll make sure, Jerry, I know you've sent it out before. We'll make sure you can send it out again so that you can go right there. You can text it, and you can, get right online, and you can send a letter to your senator. Our focus is the Senate, because that's what's standing in the way. So you can we try to make it as easy for you as possible. They need to hear from you. And frankly, Democrats need to hear from you too. Even if, like I said, even if your member is someone who says they support the Voting Rights Act, it's a 1-2 punch. We need them to also support a pathway to passing it. So it's really important that they hear from you, and they hear how important it is to do whatever it takes. And if that means amending the filibuster for the purposes of voting rights, to me, I think that's a fair trade, because voting rights is always sacrosanct. I don't care what party you're in. I don't care who you're voting for. To be honest with you, you could vote a straight up and down Republican ticket. I want you to be able to vote.
Right.
And so that's what's important.
It's fundamental to our democracy.
Fundamental to our democracy. And we know our democracy is under threat. Today, you're hearing a lot about January 6th, rather, and you're hearing all that stuff. This is a clear and present danger.
Right. And we are in Arizona, so we've been a hotbed of some of these dangers that have been afoot. There's been, ties of our elected officials have been tied to January 6th. So We here on the ground in Arizona know firsthand the dangers that are at stake. If you are watching the audience, if you have a question, please drop it in the comments. We do have one question, and I guess we'll try our best to answer this between President Dean and myself, maybe even Joy. Mark Overall asks, he's curious as to how the Black and brown communities are effectively represented in a Republican-controlled state like Arizona. So our governor is a Republican. Both of our senators are Democrats. And in the House, George, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe there's a 5-4 Republicans on 5 of the House seats, 4 are democratically held.
Congressional, yes.
Congressional, right. So we have a pretty good mix. I think Arizona is evolving in its representation and its demographics. So I think our elected officials are a reflection of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really hope that people will reach out to all members, not just those who, I used to work in the Senate. I was chief of staff for Kirsten Gillibrand for about a year or so. And so what I would say is one of the things she would always say is to people who were coming and meeting with us, hey, who have you met with from the Republican Party?
Right.
Sometimes we tend to go to, Democrats. Those are just nice meetings to have. But the truth is they're already with you, right? You want to make sure they're with you. But once you've met with them, they're with you. Check that box. Tell them I'll catch you later. We love you. But then go meet with your Republican members. Go meet with Democratic members who may be more on the fence. Really target your actions to those who still need to be convinced. Because they need to hear from you too. Even if they're not your party, they're still your representative. They're still your senator. And so we have to make sure we're not kind of, preventing them from awkward moments. We need to be going to them. We need to be talking to them. We need to be delivering their scorecards to them. And if it's a score, we need to be doing that work. Not letting them off the hook.
Right, and really have a conversation with them about that.
Absolutely.
And to the point, even well, to be clear, the Greater Phoenix Urban League and the National Urban League are nonpartisan, nonprofit organizations. Just so happens that some of the issues that we are talking about are seemingly better supported and better backed by one party over the other. But as you just mentioned, Joe Manchin happens to be a Democrat in this case, and one of the folks that we may have been inclined to presume or assume that he will support some of these issues and is going to take some negotiating.
Yeah, case in point, yeah.
Right.
It's not about party. You do have to look at their positions, and especially those members who we know are inclined. There's Republicans. We know that they really support voting rights.
Right.
This is a political thing. And so we can't let them off the hook. We have to remind them about their place in history, and that the eyes are on them.
Joy, I have to ask, based on your experience and so forth, can you see light at the end of the tunnel? And it's not a train coming.
Well, I don't want to tell it all. So Jerry and President Dean, we'll tell you some stuff privately, maybe afterwards. But I do see light at the end of the tunnel if we keep up pressure. There is a bipartisan, not bipartisan, it's not the right word, but there is a unique group of senators, not just all progressive senators, who are saying we need a change in the filibuster. And that has to be drilled in. So the Senate is having family conversations with those senators who still need to be moved in the right direction on the filibuster, on the Senate rule. And figuring out what that looks like. Like I said, it's not all or nothing. It doesn't mean we won't have a filibuster. We want to be able to delay bad legislation because, you're the majority today, you'll be the minority tomorrow. But to be able to stop it forever means that then the majority doesn't rule. Then why are we voting? It really is stealing people's right to vote. So you can delay for the purposes of coming together, but there has to be an end, right? So we can't just go on forever. So I do see a light at the end of the tunnel, because I think when I started, so look, I'll share with you. Like I said I'm a Senate person, and I'm older than I look, and I was kind of old school about it. I felt like we should have a filibuster, because that's what had been ingrained in me, from when I first worked there. I've really come around. Many of us have come around. There's been a lot of growth in the last year about it because we just simply see the facts, or that it's not working. It's a broken system. And at this point, we're literally not getting anything done. We're so excited about the bipartisan infrastructure bill, in part because we haven't been able to get a lot done. There haven't been a lot of signings at the White House on consequential bills, right? Not small things, but on big consequential bills. And that's a problem. We elect people so that they can get things done. It's not enough anymore to say, well, I introduced that bill.
Right.
Well, I talked to my people in the back room, cloakroom, whatever. No, we cannot be satisfied with that. That's not a win for us. A win is a signing ceremony.
Yeah.
And with pens being handed around and implementation. That's what's a big win. And we're not going to settle for these fake wins anymore. Because, as President Dean has said so many times, the stakes are too urgent. We're too desperate. If we don't address this by the end of the year, next year, you're going to see a lot of retirements because a lot of members are not going to be able to win their elections because they simply have been gerrymandered in a way that doesn't, that doesn't keep their seat. We have Black members of Congress. We're being targeted.
Right? You made a great point. The introducing the bill it's not enough. It's just a headline, and that might win
the headline.
It might win some PR in the short term, but the long term is actually getting the bill passed. You mentioned the gerrymandering and the redrawing of the district lines, which we are all going through around the country. Would you like to share any insight on the importance of our community members becoming involved in that process?
Absolutely. You have to show up. You have to listen. You have to raise hell. You have to, hear from your members who might be having their seats threatened, right? Where they're thrown in the district with another person of color, and they're doing that to diminish the vote, or being targeted against other communities of color. That happens. We definitely do. There are lawsuits that are happening all across the country that our partners who are sort of the litigating arm of the civil rights community, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, the LDF, will be filing lawsuits, are filing lawsuits everywhere. Some even do it before the redistricting plan in advance because it is so important to get out in front of these plans. Once they're done, it's impossible to undo. So that is why it's so important that we try to pass this bill this year, this calendar year. If we're talking about this in January, I'm going to be a lot angrier than I am now, and President Dean is going to be with me. We're not going to look as coiffed as we do right now. We're going to be upset. I say it in jest because we have to keep it light, but the truth is, it's not light. It's actually very heavy. We literally have members who they are trying to push out of existence. With partisan, with partisan redistricting plans. So it's critical that we address that, and that passing these two bills is a requirement. And just in case you all are watching sort of like Sunday television, some of you will have seen Congressman Clyburn go on and say, in his view, we should combine the bills, take parts from the critical parts from each and combine the bills. Look, we're not taking a position on that. However they do it, if the Senate wants to do it, great. They have both bills in front of them. And they have the ability to they've already made small changes to John Lewis. They've already made small changes to, big changes for the People Act, so much that they call it a whole different name now. We've all, so that's fine.
Right.
But you still got to have to get over a 60 vote threshold. So for us, the details are important, but we've gotten it to the point where the details we've been fighting. So for those who heard, previously before that there was going to be a national voter ID mandate, that is not in the bill anymore, in part due to our efforts, right? So we're fighting to keep the bills clean and good, right? But the issue now is not the details. The issue is on the process. So if you hear, a combined bill, you might say, well, does that mean only one is passed? No, it might be that in order to get it passed, you get one shot at it. And so they have to combine the bills together. If that's the case, then that's the case. But we're not interested in the sausage making. We're interested in the details, and we're interested in a pathway forward.
Got it. I know we only have you for a couple of more minutes. One of the final reminder for anyone in the audience, if you have a question for Joy, please drop it in the chat. We want to give you the opportunity to ask your question. President Dean, did you have anything else for Joy before we kind of begin winding down?
No, I just want to thank Joy for being with us this evening and providing the kind of optimism and so forth that she has shown. And hopefully it's going to carry over and get us to the end of this. And
look,
I do think that before the end of the year is so very, very important.
So very, very important. And it's also important for you to reiterate this message. When people talk about the must-pass bills for the end of the year, we're very clear. Build Back Better Act, right? The human infrastructure, that is a must-pass bill. Everyone knows that. Mm-hmm. Everyone knows appropriation, some kind of CR, all of that stuff. But for us, voting rights is a must-pass bill. That means no Christmas, no New Year's Eve, none of that until you get this work done. And so be prepared to mobilize if we need to mobilize. We've already told them their holiday season is at risk because that's how dire it is. That's how dire it is. And we know that once you get into an election year, and obviously next year is an election year, it'll be very hard. It doesn't get easier from here on out. We want to do it now. And we are keeping up the pressure. We've met with Senator Manchin, not once, but twice. Civil rights groups, when I say we. And we've met with him. We've done one-on-ones with him. They've been good meetings, sometimes robust. And out of that, there has been movement. So we feel good about it. And we will continue to meet with any member of Congress that wants to meet with us, whether they want it to be private or whether they want it to be public. We'll do it wherever they are, because we want to impress upon them what is happening around the country, the threat. And it's not a benign threat. And it's not a threat that's of equal malignancy. It is targeted at people of color. It is targeted at older voters. It is targeted at young voters, right? People who are in university systems. And so it is targeted at new voters. So these are threats that are targeted at people that a certain party feels is predisposed to vote. And we can't pretend like that's not happening.
Right.
And that's
thank you all so much for having me tonight.
Joy, we thank you so much for showing up, giving us your time, energy, and expertise. You are absolutely a subject matter expert on it, and there's no one else that we would have rather had this on behalf of the federal voting laws and acts that are going through Congress at the moment. So
thank you. Well, I love it a little bit. So
thank you so much, Joy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. On behalf of Mark Morial, thank you for everything that you are doing out in the Phoenix Urban League in Arizona. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, Joy, we'll look forward to getting that information and getting it redistributed out to our community members.
Absolutely. We will send, and I see Carter Mobley Notary would like that fact sheet, and we'll make sure to get it over.
Got it. That's one of our professionals in effect. All right, everyone, have a great night, and until next month, we'll see you on the next Meet the Leaders. Have a good night.
Yes.
Good night.
Good night.